So think about this central paradox for a second. You have a young man growing up in the absolute heart of the American century, with all the privilege that implies. And yet, at the same time, he is confronting his own mortality almost daily. That's the John F. Kennedy we meet long before any of the Camelot myth.
Exactly. We've been really digging into Fredrik Logevall's incredible biography, JFK, Coming of Age in the American Century. And our whole mission here is to pull out the most essential insights from that portrait. Enough to, hopefully, shift your understanding of the man himself. The raw material, not the finished statue.
Okay, so let's jump into that, the first insight. This idea of privilege, pain, and realism. Logevall really paints this picture of a constant tug-of-war. On one side, you have the incredible insulation of the Kennedy wealth. On the other, Jack's extreme physical vulnerability.
Right. It wasn't just a bad back. We're talking crippling pain, Addison's disease, things that nearly killed him multiple times. And what's fascinating is Logevall's argument about what this creates. He thinks this constant closeness to death fostered a kind of unvarnished realism in him.
An unvarnished realism. So the idea is that because he knew how fragile his own life was, he was skeptical of easy talk about war and sacrifice later on.
That's the core of it. He understood on a really deep level that things can fall apart at any moment, no matter how much money or power your family has.
But I have to ask, couldn't that also lead to something else, like a kind of fatalism or even self-absorption? How does Logevall square that suffering with the entitlement that clearly came from being a Kennedy?
That's the essential tension. And he doesn't shy away from it. The suffering didn't cancel out the entitlement, but Logevall argues it made him intellectually serious, which I think leads us right into the second big insight, that he developed a truly independent mind.
Yeah, this challenges that common story that he was just carrying out the family script after his older brother, Joe Jr., died.
It was so much more complicated than that. Logevall really pushes back on that idea.
Okay, so what's the hard evidence for that? I mean, we all know he wrote his Harvard thesis, Why England Slept, but what did it actually argue that was so different?
Well, for one, it became a bestseller. But more importantly, it was a direct intellectual repudiation of his father. Think about it. Joe Sr. was famously an isolationist. He was pro-appeasement with Nazi Germany. Jack's book argued the exact opposite, that Britain's failure to prepare for war was a huge moral and political failing. He was attacking the very complacency his father represented.
So you really have to look for those specific intellectual breaks. It's not just about what a political heir says, but where they actively break from the family doctrine. That's a crucial lesson.
Exactly. And that seriousness was then forged in World War II, which is our third insight. We all know the PT-109 story, the heroism. But Logevall focuses less on that and more on what the war taught Kennedy about the limits of leadership and just sheer human endurance.
Right. He uses his letters from that time, which are apparently full of disillusionment, a sense that war is just clumsy and brutal.
Precisely. And Logevall makes this incredible connection. He shows how Kennedy, as a young congressman, was already warning that an atomic war would mean literal, total global annihilation. This wasn't the typical Cold War posturing. This was a visceral fear, born directly from his own experience with war's reality. It's a direct line to the caution he'd show later, like in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Which brings us to the last insight, this mixed portrait we're left with in 1956, just before the Camelot years really began.
Yeah, and ending the book there is such a smart move. You see Kennedy on the threshold. He's intellectually curious. He's serious about service, but he's also entitled. He's an absentee senator at times. His personal choices raise real ethical questions.
You see the character formation before the myth-making machine kicks in.
Yes. You're left to grapple with that tension. He was committed to public service, but he was also capable of real moral lapses. Logevall just puts it all out there for you to assess.
So in the end, you don't get the flawless hero of the legend. You see someone who is deeply shaped and, frankly, sometimes constrained by the ideas and the pressures of his time.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to really chew on. When you're looking at political figures today, especially those from a political dynasty, what specific evidence would convince you that they are thinking for themselves? I mean, beyond just their talking points. What would prove to you that it's genuine conviction and not just them carrying out the family script?